Hello and welcome to the 495 podcast. I'm your host, Doug Sparks, editor-in-chief of Merrimack Valley magazine. Lou, how are you doing today?
Doing very well. Just trying to keep busy.
Yeah,
which isn't too hard these days.
Right, I know.
Yeah,
it's true. The last time we talked, I'd been telling you I had this problem with my toddler not being able to sleep. And I think we kind of fixed it. And I don't want to speak too soon because we were talking before and we had a few days of success.
Cut out the TV, right?
We cut out the TV almost completely except for a little David Attenborough, like nature show right before bed. And that's kind of this ritual. And then magnesium oil, which isn't an oil. And I don't even know if it works. I don't know if it's the fact that it's a routine. It's kind of tingly. Maybe it's some sort of sensory thing. I know they used magnesium oil to treat like if you have sore muscles from working out, people rub it in. But anyway, I
have to get some. I forgot about that from last week.
One of the things you can do to save money, by the way, is you can actually buy the magnesium flake, which is not expensive at all, and make your own oil. Mm-hmm. And people do use it to treat sleep. So anyways, it seems to be working. And we had a rough night last night where she woke up at 1 for the first time in a while, but went back to sleep pretty quickly. So it's not as though I've been up since 1 a.m. like it was a few weeks ago. So anyways, we seem to have kind of figured something out here. So, that makes my life easier.
It's encouraging. It's good news.
Absolutely.
And every parent is writing down magnesium oil as we speak.
Oil. Yeah, my next article will be about getting your toddler to sleep. I've become the expert. Although, they're all different. It's hard to know what works. But we did pretty quickly turn her around from someone who was going to bed late and waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning and really struggling with sleep to someone who sleeps from like 8 to 6.
Nice.
In a short time. And by the way, it's not me. It's not like I'm some mad sleep scientist.
Right.
I had advice from friends, and I kind of cobbled together stuff that I thought might work. And maybe we figured out a recipe, for this one. Who knows what's in store with the baby?
Worth a try for some people, right?
Worth a try, sure. So our guest today is.
Will it work with my dog?
Will it work with your dog? Well, I don't know. I don't know if magnesium oil seems like something that's just kind of. I'm not a doctor. I don't want to say anything, but I imagine it would be safe. And I get the sense it's the sort of thing that almost like vitamin D around here. Like people don't get enough vitamin D, so you take it as a supplement. Maybe it's that kind of thing where we just don't get enough. Yeah. We're not eating enough tofu or whatever it is you get it from. So you get a little bit extra in your diet. Doesn't hurt you, maybe helps you. Who knows?
Right.
So anyways, our guest today is Amy T., the first comedian ever to appear on the 495. Amy, how are you doing?
I'm fabulous. That's kind of fun, being the first.
The first, absolutely. Well, it can be first. It can be daunting and frightening too. I don't know. But you've been doing this for a long time, right? You've been in comedy for when did you? At least 10 years, because I saw YouTube footage of you from 2010.
Oh yeah, that could be scary. But yeah, I started about 15 years ago. Depending on 2010 footage, that could be before sobriety or after sobriety.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
that's always scary.
The footage I saw was immediately after sobriety, and since you kind of bring it up, part of what you talk about very candidly in your comedy is your own experiences with mental health and with addiction issues. And right now we're in the middle of this pandemic, which is an extremely stressful time for people facing addiction issues and mental health issues. Do you have any advice for people who are now in the midst of this about how to, because you're experienced in this and you've talked about it and you speak about it publicly, what do you say to people who are really struggling right now?
For me personally, what I try to do is just fill my day with as much joy as I possibly can so that it keeps my headspace happy. I have a toolbox of coping skills that I use to keep me, going through a downward spiral. And I got sober, last week was 10 years. So I feel like I have the addiction part fairly under control, so I don't think about that. But what is really difficult is people that this has uprooted their entire life, like differently, whether working from home or whatever. So they might not have had some of the coping skills before,
Right. So you didn't personally feel that pull of old habits just kind of like haunting you and saying, okay, we're going through this terrible time. Let's go back to the way things were 10 years ago.
Do I feel like that?
Yeah.
No, gosh, no, not at all. Because I came from rock bottom, 10 years ago. So every day is a gift, and I really do wake up like that every day. People are very upset about the pandemic and stuff, and I'm just trying to find the glass half full every day that I wake up. Like, you know what, I'm not sick today, so let's start with that. And, I work for a mental health organization with clients that are in quarantine right now, and I'm having a little bit of difficulty with them, trying to get them to, engage a little bit and not feel sorry for themselves.
Sure.
They're home, they're safe. I personally hope the grocery stores never go back to the way they were. I love waiting in line. I love the aisle. I said in my act probably 15 years ago that the grocery stores should be like the road, up one way and down the other, and like no U-turns either. I don't care if you forgot something. Finish the aisle, come back down, and go back up and around. So I'm like in heaven right now at the grocery store.
Sure. I'm a writer and an editor, and I haven't. This might surprise you to hear. I have a little bit of an introverted side. So there are aspects of this whole pandemic that suit me just fine. Other things are a little bit more frightening. I mean, but it's interesting because you talk about being positive. In humor and comedy is something that uplifts people. It makes people laugh, and that's part of the cathartic therapeutic element. And yet it seems that so many comedians struggle with mental health issues, and their humor comes out of darkness. Do you think about why this is?
For me personally, I find like to get out of the darkness, you have to find humor in it. And as you say, I speak very candidly of my addiction and mental health. And for me, it's therapeutic. It's cathartic because I know somebody else is out there struggling the same way. And if I can make a joke of it and not seem, of course, take the edge off of such a serious subject, people always come up to me after my shows and are thankful that I talk about mental health because somebody's struggling, or their mom or their sister, and they appreciate the outlook on it.
Right. So I looked at experimental comedy therapy, which is your website. It's experimentalcomedy.com. And we'll talk a little bit about your organization. And you do a lot. You do comedy, but you also do public speaking. Originally, we were going to have you on the show because you were going to be like the VIP speaker at the Merrimack Valley Conference for Women, which was going to be in Westford. That's been pushed to September 24th. You can sign up on the website if anyone's interested, sheslocal.org. And you're doing a special VIP show on September 23rd. Is that still in the works?
That's the plan. That's what the date we moved it to. So I'm hoping that's going to still happen.
Yeah. So you do a lot. I mean, you're not just working the nightclubs. You're using comedy in all sorts of avenues that people might not expect. What are you doing right? I'm sorry?
So I speak at like colleges and hospitals, mental health organizations to bring kind of humor into the levity of mental health,
So on your website, I was looking at your bio, and there isn't much about where you grew up and in your youth. Where did you grow up, and when did you discover you had a bug for telling jokes and making people laugh?
So I grew up in Haverhill, still live here, so I've lived here my entire life, and I knew, I had a whisper about comedy, I think, when I was in high school, but it was a very difficult time. Like I knew, I was very overweight, I struggled with depression and things like that, and so in high school I knew I had like a whisper inside my soul, and then in my late 20s, somebody pushed me. They were like, you got to do this, and I did it. I took a class at Northern Essex Community College with Dave Radigan, and 6 weeks later we performed in front of an audience. And the minute I got my first laugh, like I just knew. I knew in my soul that's where I was meant to be.
Wow. So let's see. I want to look. So I mean, comedy must comedy must, in the face of a pandemic. I'm sorry, I'm looking for my notes are jumbled up here.
How has this role for you changed the comedy as people are facing these times that they're facing? I know for myself personally, and I wanted to ask you this a little bit later in the program, I am binging stand-up on Netflix. Because I love,
that's awesome.
I love the art form. I admire stand-up so much because you just walk out and you got to do an hour and a half on stage with just a mic. It's like, these guys are awesome. So how has the comedy changed in society today? What's its role? And of these Netflix guys, or the guys we know, guys and girls we know, Who are the guys who influence you? Who are the people that you really like?
Well, I mean, who influenced me was probably people that they're not household names, but Suzanne Westenhofer is a comedian. She was like the first gay comedian out in the '90s, and I remember seeing her on HBO, and I was just like, oh yeah, that's something. And she's been a mentor for me. I'm worked with her in P-Town over the years, so she's been a huge mentor. Jessica Kirson is one of my favorites. Who else? I'm trying to think. I've so many favorites.
So as far as influences, one thing I wanted to ask you is I think in terms of just your average person and them thinking about comedy as an industry, I think prior to this pandemic, the big news would have been Dave Chappelle and the Netflix special. Do you have?
That was good. Did you see it?
Yeah, I thought it was fantastic. I think the guy's a genius, but that was the controversy, and this is what comedy is facing. It's like comedians have to say things that push buttons and cross boundaries, and at the same time, now we have to wonder: is there an ethical role for comedians, and are there lines that ought not to be crossed?
I don't know. I think if you're funny, it's funny. But
Yeah.
you're always going to offend. You're going to offend somebody. If it's well written and you're riding an edge, I think it's great, and I don't think anything's off limits.
Yeah.
But Dave Chappelle, like you mentioned, I mean, he's brilliant,
Right.
Like just brilliant at what he does, and he's perfect at controversy. But he lands the joke.
Yeah, one of the things I noticed about your the clips I saw of you on YouTube, and you do have a YouTube channel if people want to check them out, is your stuff is pretty edgy. I mean, given, I was looking at the website and I was seeing this stuff that tends to be kind of uplifting and feel good, but on stage you seem pretty fearless. Is that a fair description of your act?
Fearless. That's funny. Yeah, I'm probably full of all kinds of adrenaline while I'm up there.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I think I try to ride an edge. Depending on the venue of where I'm at, I try to tailor it. I don't suspect I'll be too edgy at the women's event in September.
Yeah.
I'm gonna.
Sure.
So I try to tailor it a little bit.
Yeah.
But what I talk about for me personally is it's very autobiographical. So it's what's going on in my life, and a lot of it is very much the same. Like whether it's a heterosexual marriage or a gay marriage, it's still some of the same things that a relationship goes through. So I talk a lot about that. I don't know what else.
Yeah, and people, by the way, if they haven't looked at it's the Experimental Comedy Therapy is your organization, and the word mental is in capital letters there, experimental. And you're really candid about your past with mental health. So for people who don't know you, what have you been through and what's your experience been and what, where do you come from in that end of the spectrum?
So experimental comedy therapy is also the acronym, ECT, right, is an acronym for electroconvulsive therapy. So I did that kind of play on purpose. Because I think everybody could use a little shock humor, and laughter is the shortest distance between two people. So one of my favorite quotes. So I did the ECT kind of on purpose when I did that, and then ECT is the acronym of how I try to live my life: be responsible for the energy I bring into the world, and practice compassion and tolerance. So it came full circle. That's how that came about. And as far as my mental health struggles, I was diagnosed 10 years ago. When I hit rock bottom, I was $59,000 in debt. My car had just been repossessed. I was financially and emotionally bankrupt. And what did it for me is I had done a show in New Jersey on a Friday night, and Saturday morning I woke up in a strange apartment in New York City, passed out in the fireplace. And I woke up and I had no idea how I had got from New Jersey to New York City. I didn't know whose apartment I was in. And I was just like, oh, wow, things are, and then I had nothing, right? My career was going down the drain. Prior to that, I was becoming quickly very successful around the Boston and New England area. I had filmed a DVD and was touring the country at film festivals that it had released in. And so I was really riding a wave. but my addiction and mental health got in the way, which I didn't know I had anything. I didn't. Addiction, I probably, in hindsight, knew I was having a problem, but as far as my mental health, I never for a second thought I had a problem until I tried to commit suicide and then got help.
Yeah. Do you wonder what path you would have taken if you hadn't had these struggles? Like, do you think you would still be a comedian if you hadn't been through this?
If I hadn't done, I definitely would still be a comedian because I still am. And I think that back then the hope was being on a sitcom and being a sitcom star. That was the dream. And then the path changed, and it's still not to say it's out of the question, but I'm more realistic about it.
Sure. You work with an organization called NAMI, NAMI, I guess is how they would pronounce it.
Yep. NAMI.
So what's that?
The National Alliance of Mental Illness it's an organization. It's a nationwide organization that is a resource for individuals with mental health struggles or diagnosis. Has help for families. It's a huge resource for anybody that is interested in exploring more. They run all kinds of groups for peer-to-peer. They have a family group that they have so that family members who have loved ones that are struggling with mental health, it gives them an outlet to learn more about it. They're fantastic. So I do a lot of speaking for them and go in their program called In Our Own Voice. They have another program right now. They're working with police officers to train them on how to maybe approach somebody that is struggling with mental health. Sometimes it can look in various different ways.
Are you involved with that? Are you involved with the police officers in that aspect of the program?
I have spoken for them, but I am not training with them, no.
And are they so do you have a sense of how receptive they are to this approach?
They really are extremely receptive, and what I'm gathering back from my supervisor there is that it's making an impact. That things that they hadn't thought of, if they've never been around it or introduced to it, then it looks different to people. So it has been a good program that they put together.
Yeah. So how do you think the current situation, the pandemic, is shaping comedy as an industry? How are you pivoting? How are you changing? And how are you adapting?
I'm definitely writing, so I'm hoping to have some new material by the fall. But it's impacted a lot of our income, and I'm wondering, I'm wondering, like, when it's kind of over, are people going to be rushing to comedy clubs? Is it going to impact, ticket sales and stuff? Will they have the money to be able to go? Is that what they want to do? Is be in a closed room? I have no idea. I went from probably the busiest schedule I was going to have probably in my career with some of the biggest gigs that I was going to do to, like, in 24 to 48 hours, just the emails kept rolling in, like, sorry, canceled. I'm like, ugh.
Yeah.
So I'm eager to see what the fall will bring, but realistic that maybe that won't be a priority for people.
Sure. I mean, what are you doing to prepare for the worst case? That people aren't going to be going to the clubs? Or you're just not thinking of that yet?
I'm honestly not thinking about it yet.
Yeah, it's probably a good thing, right? It's probably best not to think about it too much, because that can be suffocating, right?
Yeah, there's nothing I can do about it, and when the time comes, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. So you mentioned one of your dreams early on was maybe to do TV. Do you still think about that?
I do, actually, and it's funny. A couple of people reached out to me in the last couple of weeks about, like, putting my wife and I on a sitcom. Like, our interaction can be very fun, and sometimes we'll catch each other on video and post it on Facebook, and people just laugh, and I'm like, So I started kind of maybe outlining maybe something.
Yeah. Have you ever thought of doing something like that on YouTube, or using something other than the standard media outlets? Because I just kind of think occasionally you see these shows on HBO that just started as something someone did with, like, a camcorder, and then it takes off on YouTube, and then that leads to HBO. Do you ever play around with those kind of ideas?
I play around with the ideas all the time. I just don't execute them.
Yes.
And also, like, in my real life, I'm extremely shy. And so I have a hard time doing that whole, like, selfie camera. Like, some people are so comfortable, like, just doing, like, a Facebook Live or whatever. I'm not comfortable like that in my skin. So that's why there's not a ton of video up on my website or on YouTube, because it's not my comfort zone.
Yeah. Well,
So,
this is going to strike some people as strange, right? Because they assume if you get up on the stage and you like grabbing that microphone, that you enjoy that attention and you enjoy that response, and it must be weird for people to think, oh, that you're by nature a shy person. Do you see that as a conflict within yourself?
Sometimes, yes, because the person that when I'm up there and I'm by myself and I've got the stage and the microphone and the spotlight, like, that's my drug of choice. That's where I get my rush. But when it comes to getting off stage and people, talking to me after, is where, and I can feel it in my chest right now, like the anxiety and the I wouldn't call it fear, but there's definitely like a major anxiety of, like, talking to people after. Socializing is for me a big one.
Sure.
So the dichotomy is challenging.
Sure. Do you ever have that situation where people think you're rude? Like, you sometimes hear about, like, musicians or something who just like to be left alone after they perform. So people just kind of assume they're jerks because they just walk away and they go to their dressing room. Do you ever fear that people see you that way, like you're done, you want to go into your shell, and it might come across the wrong way?
I'm conscious of that, so I try not to. So if anybody wants to come up and talk to me, then I just stay on.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
Because I don't want anybody to feel like that, because they're not bothering me, and they might not know what's going on inside, so I don't want them to, interpret it something different. So I try to be really as social as possible.
Sure.
Amy, let me ask you about it, because it sounds like what you're telling me is you're like most of us somewhat in the public eye, that we have kind of an alter ego when we're working and a separate personality when we're not working. And talk to me about dealing with that. If that's true for you, talk to me about dealing with that with your bipolar disorder, and whether you actually get some gains from that, the ability to put on another personality.
I don't think about that too much, but I guess I do have to put on a different face, because what they're seeing on stage, you want to portray, off stage. If people are, kind enough to come up and want to talk to you after, you want them to know that. But then the other side of, I speak openly about all that, but the other side, sometimes you want that privacy and you want to just be able to be in a hole, know?
Yeah, well, for me, it's like, when I'm on the air or where I'm doing a public appearance, people expect that from me. That's what they came for. That's what they're looking for. So I'm comfortable doing it. But you get me up in a party or pull me up, in a situation where it's just where I'm not in that game face type of situation, it's very difficult for me to do that.
Oh yeah, if I'm at a social gathering, forget it. I'm the one in the corner playing with the dog.
Yeah.
I'm very much to myself when it comes to stuff like that.
So what about your writing process and your creative process?
Yeah.
Where do you get your ideas? Do you have a special way of writing stuff down? Do you write with a pen? Do you write on a laptop? Where do the ideas come from, and how do you make them into something?
Usually a good gauge is if I can make my wife laugh. And so if I make her laugh, then I know I have something a little bit. And then a lot of it really comes from my autobiography, what's going on in my life. You can't steal it because it's mine. And, right. And I think I'm unique in my own way. So that's kind of where it goes. I do, I write a lot, one-liners on my iPad and then try to expand from there. I try to challenge myself every time I'm on stage to do a new joke so that I can flush it out and see where it's working and where it's not. And then if I'm getting ready for a big show, I literally grab a notebook and pen and write out every word verbatim. It's kind of like superstition to me. And I write out my entire act word by word and do it that way.
Yeah, when I'm binging Netflix, and I love stand-up, like I said, I like the media and I like the art form, and I'm watching Bill Burr, for example, I'm thinking to myself, that's what's going on in my head all the time. This would be easy. So, and I'm thinking a lot of it is drawn from real life. So when your jokes that you do, and I saw a lot of the jokes you've done about the several wives and your current wife, how many of those come first from a real experience where you might have a quip in an actual conversation and say, okay, there's a joke here, and then flesh it out?
Most of them, I bet.
Yeah, I'll bet too. Yeah.
I bet most of them, just like, even if you're just hanging out with friends and you get like witty banter,
Yep.
and you're like, ooh, there you go. And then you grab the one line or the subject and then run from it from there.
Yeah, your act sounded very organic in that way, where it's like she actually said that at some point, and then you flesh out the bit around it from there.
So here's a question. You live in Haverhill, as you said, but you travel, at least in the past, pre-pandemic, you traveled quite a bit to perform. When people ask you where you're from, do you say Haverhill or do you say I'm from outside of Boston? And if they press you, how do you explain Haverhill to the outside world?
Usually, yeah, it's just easier to say just north of Boston.
Okay.
And then if they're like, oh, I know Boston, and then you're like, all right, then you say Haverhill, and they're like, oh, where's that? And it's like, oh, about 40 minutes north. It's got a castle. Not too many people are familiar with it.
Yeah. I just wonder this is something that comes up a lot in, for people who are writing novels, musicians, is where do you draw material from this area? What's funny or what's interesting or what's dramatic about the Merrimack Valley that makes it different than California or New Jersey? What gives this place its character? And do you ever think about that? Like, what is, if maybe when the opportunity to do TV came up, you would have moved to LA, but you're here now. What gives you fuel in this area?
We don't much leave the Merrimack Valley area, do we?
I do. I'd be without a job if I didn't have the Merrimack Valley area. No, there's a lot of great things. I mean, it's David Maloney is a novelist who just came out with this book called Barker House, and he worked as a corrections officer up in New Hampshire. It's a fantastic novel. It just came out. If anyone hasn't read it, I encourage you to go check it out. But it was interesting to me because I was reading a novel it's on Bloomsbury Press. It's like a national, international level novel. But he's writing about like the drugstores in Nashua, and I think we tend to downplay the significance of our environment and how much there really is here. I mean, there's a diverse community. There's a difference between Haverhill and Andover, but they're pretty close to each other. So there's a lot going on there, and I think we tend to be like maybe to a fault dismissive of how rich this area is for material.
I would say that is a fair assumption. You're right.
Okay.
So now that you're saying it, I'm like, oh yeah, there is actually quite a bit.
Amy,
Yeah.
I'm a Haverhill native too, and I always relate to Haverhill as the Walmart of the Merrimack Valley.
That's awesome.
Yeah, there's so many characters in Haverhill, and there have been characters since we've grown up. We've had Amy, you're not old enough, but there was a guy who would walk around the streets talking to God on his transistor radio.
I remember Radio Joe.
Radio Joe, right, exactly right. And
Yes.
there have been several characters over the year, and of course Haverhill has produced, Archie, the Archie Comics, and several other characters out of it. MGM. It's a really interesting place if you can if you have some tolerance for a little bit of weirdness.
A little bit of weirdness,
For sure.
and it can be this can be a tough environment, and I think people from this region may have a reputation for almost like rudeness or a certain kind of sourness. Like if you're just walking down the street, like I lived in the South for a while, you walk down the street in the South,
yeah.
someone looks you in the eye and they say, hello, sir, how are you doing? And if you've been in this region for a while, you're just like, is this guy going to rob me? What's he up to? What's he trying to get from me? Right?
Well, when I taught my daughter to drive, I taught her never to interact with other drivers because you don't know who you're getting involved with.
Yeah.
That's really good advice in Haverhill, too.
Yeah, exactly.
Whether they're standing in line next to you in Market Basket or in a checkout line, you never know who you're about to interact with, so be careful.
Yeah, and this goes way back. If you read
Yeah.
Nathaniel Hawthorne when he was writing about New England, he would describe New Englanders as people who just kind of sit at the bar and stare into their beers. Like really sort of like a little bit insular, thorny, or just kind of wanting everybody at a little bit of a distance. Maybe it's the winters. Maybe it's who knows. And then of course, like any sort of stereotype, it doesn't hold for everybody, because there's a tremendous amount of warmth and there's a tremendous amount of vitality in the region as well. But we can come across to people in other parts of the country as of a particular type. I'm just wondering how much you see that, and how much you see that when you're out and performing in California. Do they see you as a New England comic? And
I don't know if they actually even see you. You know what I mean? They're kind of like wrapped up in their own.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
I like Haverhill though. Like I like the location is great. Like we just bought our home here a couple weeks ago, and my wife, I'm selling her on Haverhill. She doesn't love it. She doesn't feel like she comes from Stoneham, so she doesn't love it. But we love our home and stuff like that. But I like it. It's conveniently located to everything. It's got a little bit of everything to it.
So
I think they tried.
Yeah, Stoneham isn't that different. So how do you sell her? Like, what are the points where you're like, oh no, you have to understand, we have this in Haverhill. How do you sell this to your wife?
That there's Target across the street. There's Target. Winnie Kinney was a good selling point for a while, and then it got then it kind of got sketchy for a little bit.
Sure.
So that was a selling point, but.
I mean, Haverhill's also changing, right? Like the Haverhill today is very different than 3 years ago, and I fear that the pandemic has slowed things down. But there's really good people who are trying to do things to innovate and bring a lot of energy to the downtown area. There are new restaurants coming in, new cafes, and it's the sort of place where an artist or a creative person could still potentially live relatively inexpensively, right? But have access to the sort of things you need as a creative person, like other creative people, right? Or places to meet, or places to walk, and feel some sort of connection to the world around you.
And I think like old school Haverhill residents they push back on all that excitement downtown. My family owned a restaurant in Haverhill over the course of 30 years. We had a breakfast restaurant, and that's what I grew up doing up until about 2 years ago. I finally left the business, and I was just like, I got to get out before I kill somebody. I couldn't take it anymore.
What's the restaurant?
I couldn't. It was a breakfast restaurant. Our last one was in Bradford, because we want to make sure that we separate Haverhill and Bradford.
Okay, right.
That's my favorite thing about Haverhill. Right.
I meant to say that earlier. I'm like, oh yeah, don't confuse the two.
And I always say, show me the Bradford Police Department, and we can have a discussion. Because Bradford people disown Haverhill. It's kind of funny.
It is so funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, so growing up in Haverhill and having the business in Haverhill, like I saw these people my entire life growing up with them. They came in every single morning at the same time, eating the same bacon and eggs, bitching about, the politics and the weather, like every day. Like I couldn't take it anymore, The public can be rough.
Yeah. So when you were young, were you like waiting tables? What was your involvement when you were... Like, did you work your way through high school?
So I waited tables on the weekends through school, and then when I got out of school, then we decided that maybe putting me in the kitchen cooking was probably a better option. Like, I enjoyed it better. Yeah. I didn't have to interact with people, and I was an excellent breakfast cook, and not to toot my own horn, but I know I was good. And so I was better in the kitchen, and my mom would take care of the front of the house, and it was kind of like it was perfect. She was good with customers. Because sometimes I didn't have a problem telling a customer when they were wrong, where my mom could sugarcoat it,
So does this mean in your marriage you do all the cooking or most of the cooking?
Oh, yeah, I would say I do.
Yeah. That's a good thing?
I don't mind. We're not like meal people. We're like snackers, so it's not too hot.
Yeah. Hey, actually, speaking of food, I think I remember when I was looking at some of the topics you discuss, you talk about health and wellness type issues. And diet and that sort of stuff. Is that true?
Yeah. So I used to weigh nearly 300 pounds.
Wow.
And so I lost the weight through diet and exercise. It's that new fad diet. I don't know if anybody heard of it. So stupid. And then also I find like my nutrition and my exercise is very important for my mental health. It complements each other, one without the other, and that's I don't think goes for anybody. But I'm very conscious about that. Like if I had too much sugar, I can tell. So I do try to make sure I keep an exercise routine and my nutrition fairly good.
What do you do for exercise, and how has it been impacted by what's going on right now?
All right, so yeah, since the pandemic, not so much. Our gym closed, obviously, like everybody else's, so that's been a bummer. But I'm psyched to be outside in my yard. That's kind of like or I'll go for a long walk or whatever. But my wife had 16 yards of mulch delivered for my sobriety birthday, and I've just been in heaven in my yard.
Okay. When was your sobriety birthday?
April 17th.
April 17th.
And she makes she makes a big deal of it, so it's like Christmas for me. And so I was psyched when that got delivered.
So this actually reminds me of a question I wanted to ask you. You're very public about this experience, and yet part of what the therapy is for many people is anonymity. I mean, they call it Alcoholics Anonymous. Is that strange? Is that like some kind of counter? Like, how do you manage that aspect that you're doing something supposed to be so intensely private, and yet you're doing it in front of other people?
Because I don't find any shame in it. Like I'm not ashamed. I don't feel like I need to be anonymous about my addiction struggle because it might help somebody else. I didn't use any of the programs when I got sober. It just wasn't for me. But I do go with my clients and stuff now. I don't know. The anonymous part, I think, creates the stigma.
Yeah. So you didn't use any program. How did you do it? How did you pull it off?
I just knew I was going to die if I didn't. And I was on the brink. You know what I mean? I tried to commit suicide, and so like I just knew when I realized that if I took alcohol out of the equation, let me see what happens with my life. And then when I realized alcohol was out, so many more things were getting better. So I just know not to touch it anymore. It's just not. It doesn't work for me.
Yeah. So since you do kind of think about health and wellness nutrition, we were talking about magnesium oil at the top of the show. Do you take any supplements? Do you take a multivitamin or vitamin D? Is there anything special you do with your own personal diet that you find works?
I'm a big fan of vitamin B, and that's about it. My wife is a magnesium person, though.
Oh, really?
When I heard you at the top of the show, I was
okay.
like, oh, there is something to it.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a complete nutcase, and I know everybody's heard everything before, and I'm reluctant even to kind of go down the path of thinking I've discovered something that is miraculous, only to find out it's placebo. But then you start to look into it, and it's like, oh, well, maybe there's something there. And I've certainly had, when I can't sleep, I'll drink chamomile, and that definitely calms me down. In fact, I can't drink it during the day because I'll want to go take a nap. So there are things that people use that do have an effect.
Absolutely.
Sure. So, assuming not next week, it's not going to happen next week. Assuming we get to the summer and the world kind of feels a little bit more normal again, people are starting to come out and get outside and exercise and go back to the restaurants. What are you looking forward to doing the most?
I think being with some friends. I think having some friends over for a fire pit, and we've got a movie theater for the backyard. I think just being able to connect in that way would be really nice.
Yeah.
We have a new. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law are expecting a baby in a couple weeks, and so it'll be exciting to see the new baby and their daughter now that they have. Maeve is 3, and we haven't been able to see her for a couple months. So that's kind of starting to take a toll of not having that kind of connection, I think.
Sure. Well, we've never met in person, and that's unfortunate. If you ever have one of these fire pits later on and you feel like giving me an invite, please, don't be shy. It'd be nice to hang out and meet you in person. Lou, do you have any questions for the guest?
Yeah, Amy, let me go back to the bipolar diagnosis, and I'm curious about why it was delayed. Was it a matter of being reluctant to look to mental health as a possibility of the problem, or did the symptoms have to grow to a certain point or flare up at a certain point? What caused the delay in the diagnosis of your bipolar disorder?
Probably because I didn't think I had a problem.
Yeah.
I thought that what I was going through. I went through a depression. My childhood wasn't probably the greatest, and in hindsight, it was definitely probably showing in high school. But I don't think I knew about it. And then losing the weight and stuff like that was another different cycle. So I think it was just uneducated and didn't know about mental health. Like I didn't know anything about it until 10 years ago. In any kind of bipolar, and I heard the word bipolar maybe 15 years ago when some young punk kid that worked for me took a pill for it. That's all I knew about it. So then after after my mom found me, begging me to get help, is when all the pieces started to fit into place, and I was like, oh, that's what's probably been going on all these years. And then put the substance abuse on top of it, just became a roller coaster, But I've worked very hard. Like, I no longer take medication for my mental health. I'm now doing it. I've been off my meds for like 5 years, and for me, that's just a personal victory. No judgment, but I'm able to kind of clean up the stuff that was in the basement that was kind of causing a lot of the cycles in my life. That I'm now like able to manage it organically.
What would you tell to people who are struggling but haven't checked their mental health, haven't taken the mental health route, haven't even questioned it?
Oh, that's a tough one. That's a personal journey. Even with people, even when you can see people with substance abuse problems, but until they've figured it out on their own, there's nothing you can do. The resources are out there. If you are thinking about struggling, you can Google all kinds of resources. There's online meetings, 24 hours a day. But it really, I think it's a personal thing. Somebody has to hit their rock bottom.
Great. All right, well, Amy, I really appreciate you coming on the show. So your website is the experimental comedy therapy the best way for people to kind of track you and to see what you're doing and where shows are going to be you have a Facebook page that goes along with that too, right?
Yeah. So if you go to my website, you can find the links to all my social media and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's the best way for people to follow you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you on Twitter? Do you use Twitter?
I'm not I try and I just forget. I'm just not good at it.
I'm not good. I'm terrible at Twitter. I post things all the time. I tried being funny on there. Nobody commented. Nobody cares. Nobody cares what I have to say on Twitter. I could never figure out what it was that gets people interested in at least for my own personality.
Yeah, it's too much of an ocean.
Yeah,
I can't keep up with all of them. Like between Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and Twitter, and I can't keep up. I'm just good with Facebook.
I know. There you go. So anyways, experimentalcomedy.com is the name of the website. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you guys very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Next week it's Ruby and the Groove, a Nashua band, and we're going to see we're going to see if we can get them on live, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to this.
All right.
All right.
Lou, thank you very much. Thanks, Amy.